Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma231 here, back in today to talk about Weekly Shonen Jump, issue number 40 of 2023. And can I just say here from the get-go, after looking through these chapters again to start this review up, this is a really good weekend jump. Sadly, it's got a few things ending, mainly Fabricant 100 and Tenmaku Cinema. Fabricant 100 actually ending this week and Tenmaku Cinema ending next week. But there are a lot of really good chapters in this issue this week. Of course, if you didn't know, I am recording this video about 4-ish months after these chapters initially came out. These came out at the beginning of September of 2023, September 3rd here in the States, and of course September 4th in Japan. And I currently am recording this on the 19th of December. So it is a little bit of a time gap, but slowly trying to work up my way to talk about Shonen Jump. If you don't know how we do things here on this channel, I'm going to be talking about all 13 series in Shonen Jump that I read this week, giving my thoughts on them, and at the very end of the video, I'm going to be ranking them from what I thought was the best chapter of the week to the worst chapter and everything in between, and then also picking out my favorite character of the week and pretty much highlighting a character I think that showed a lot of good things in this issue of Shonen Jump this week, right? I don't really have too much to say. Like I said, we've got 13 chapters, so before my voice just goes completely numb, I'd say we go ahead and get started with the first chapter being My Hero Academia, chapter number 339, chapters titled Organic Mingling Clusters of Light. So, of course, All Might is fighting against All for One here, and the big thing at the beginning of this chapter is All Might's pretty much thinking, like, alright, I need to start using my Hercules armor to be able to get higher turns and everything, and pretty much he continues his whole trope of using the Class 1A's quirks as weapons, right? So we see he's got some, I guess, like grappling or sticky pads that are, whatever they are. He calls them tentacle, and then floppy suction pads that pretty much be able to move between buildings, and he also uses Shoto and then Tailman, and uses all of these quirks to pretty much get everything ready. Pretty much talks about how All for One is regressing every time he takes damage, and he's also using the Anima quirk, of course, which is Koda's quirk, and he's just using a lot of these to just fight All for One correctly. The two of them are pretty much just having a big brawl, and also there's a note that All for One makes of just saying, like, hey, remember, All Might, smile, you're on camera, the entire world is still watching, right? So they just keep on fighting, and as they're fighting, All Might pretty much makes a deal of like, hey, you still don't get it, my good friend, but lights tend to flicker on and off, so while my light may be snuffed out, I'm sure someone's sure to pick up my torch and shine on, right? And we sort of then cut over this point with the whole light pun we get to see that Aoyama is, of course, facing off against the one villain, Kunaida, right? Who we really get reintroduced to here, pretty much saying, like, okay, Kunaida is a Tartarus escapee, mass murder, and on top of that, he's a corpse collector, right? Like, I think we can deal with him being a Tartarus escapee and a mass murder, but, like, just collecting corpses, like, that's just putting it too over the line, my friend, right? So at this point, we just see that Kunaida and Aoyama are just duking it out. We see that Aoyama's pretty much trapped by Kunaida's, I guess, like, plant quirk or whatever it is, right? We can't really figure out what it is, but pretty much we see that Fat Gum has been stuck by this flower quirk and is pretty much being turned into a flower on his own, right? Pretty much saying, like, it takes vitality. Kunaida makes a sting at Aoyama, pretty much saying, like, you've got no hope of escape, traitor. And while all of that is going on, like, Aoyama's trying to shoot out his naval laser quirk, but of course he doesn't have his belt, and it's just not charging, so it's no good, pretty much, right? He's really being messed up here, right? And the big moment at the end of this chapter here is, not ending yet, but Aoyama's just like, hey, whenever it comes to what I believe in, I am going to be the one to shine, and it's going to come from deep down in my core, as he uses his naval laser, and he tries to sling it over at Kunaida, but Kunaida's just like, oh, you're missing, and all of your stuff has gone behind my sight, but of course somebody else is there with him, and that is none other than Hagakure, who initially saw Aoyama pretty much being the traitor, and pretty much we get that All Might is saying like, hey, let there be light in the darkness so that I might twinkle as well, as we look back over to this fight here where, Invisible Girl, or Hagakure, is using her quirk to twirl around a light and send it back at Kunita, pretty much taking him out, as of course she uses her warp reflection with naval laser and pretty much blast Kunita out of the screen, as she tells Aoyama, hey, it took you long enough, hero. So that's a big deal right there, as we see that All Might in the fight against One For All is riding his motorcycle up into the sky with the help of all of his Class 1A quirks, and he's just like, so, oh no, I'm not going to lose here, All For One, but know this name as you burn away. And from up in the sky, he shoots out a laser beam out of his stomach and says the name Can't Stop Twinkling as he does it. This is a very awesome chapter, mainly because of the duality that's shown between the two fights going on here. Of course, the end of the Kunita fight, which I don't even think we can call it a fight, but pretty much showing that, yes, Aoyama, even though he was the traitor, he is still a massively important person to all of the My Hero verse, and All Might is showing that in full display using his quirk last to fully take out, or not fully take out, because, spoilers, All For One isn't dead yet, but pretty much showing his power off, right? So it's just a really awesome chapter, just showing how Aoyama is still warranted into My Hero verse, especially if Hagakure is like, hey, took you long enough, hero. It is just a really cool moment, all and all. So, going on from a great chapter to another great chapter, which is One Piece, chapter 1091. That caught me off guard, so I'm like, 1,000? I'm like, oh yeah, it's One Piece. That's how this series is. And of course, I didn't mention earlier, but One Piece does have the cover of Shonen Jump this week. It is just a simple cover with Luffy running with an animal, like Chopper and Usopp are also in the background. So it's just a fun little One Piece cover of the magazine. And of course, being that it had the magazine, it also has the lead cover page, which of course is just an image of all of the Straw Hat Pirates just eating a big old pizza. And one of those classic One Piece cover spreads. You really just can't go wrong with it. This chapter is titled Sentomaru, so as all the pacifistas are firing off on the island of Egghead, there is just a lot of commotion going on. All the sea beast weapons are attacking, and we just see all of the marine admirals trying to deal with that, or not marine admirals, all of the important marine people, right? I'm not that big of a One Piece nerd, I don't know everything, but there is a decently important thing here, as we see that what's his name? Vegapunk is pretty much just like, hey, right now, Sentomaru leading the pacifistas, this island's defenses are utterly impenetrable, pretty much going through the pacifista authority hierarchy. So pretty much it's anybody with an authority chip, then to Sentomaru, then to Vegapunk, and to Satellites, and then to the Five Elders themselves, right? So as we're pretty much all talking over this, we see that, of course, Kizaru, yeah, that's his name, Kizaru is throwing some lasers at Sentomaru, being that Sentomaru is not being good to the Marines right now. And we get a little bit of a backstory sort of deal, as we see that whenever a young Sentomaru was there, he beat up a lot of bears in a forest, and a young Vegapunk and a younger Kizaru, or Suzuki, is Suzuki Akainu? Whatever it is. I'm not really trying to debate that. We see that they're all around, and that they sort of took him under a wing, and Kizaru taught Sentomaru a lot of things on how to be the toughest, right? So Kizaru even mentions that, just saying like, hey, I taught you everything I could, young Sentomaru, right? So Sentomaru is using his ultimate defense to sort of help ward him off, and there's just a whole lot of fighting that goes on in this chapter, with the big sort of thing happening where the ship is being transported by the Vega Force 1, but as that's going on, Kizaru comes up, and he just says checklist needs to be eliminated, and he goes down and completely destroys the Vegapunk 1. But before he can do that, we see that Rob Lucci gets back up, Zoro gets back up and sort of parries him off, and at the same time, Luffy finally comes in to confront Kizaru, as the two of them sort of meet up, and Kizu's like, oh, hey, long time no see. And Luffy just comes in with some arm net hockey on his leg and goes and pounds Kizu's. And Kizu's like, hey, that's some very bad manners. And Luffy's like, hey, Kizu, compared to 2 years ago, we're 100 times stronger now. So it's just a cool moment showing off, like, oh yeah, Luffy's back in the game, and he's about to be fighting with an admiral. That's a really big deal by all One Piece standards, and yeah, that's really the One Piece chapter. I don't really have too much more to divulge on it. And then next up is Undead Unluck, chapter number 173. This chapter is titled, That Jerk As He Stands Is, which is a little bit of a lengthy word title, but it'll get the point across by the end of the chapter. So we sort of start off this chapter with, of course, we ended off the Chikara arc last time, and as we open up this chapter, we see that Chikara is in the Union headquarters, and we see that both of his parents are there with him. And Chikara even makes a little note of, hey, Mom, Dad, what's up about, like, keeping up for our relatives? Like, you can't talk to them while you're here. And they're both just like, hey, it's perfectly fine. We'd hate not to be in contact with you more, which is a really nice sentiment, knowing that how Chikara in the first loop was, how he didn't have any parents to rely on because they were dead because he killed them inadvertently with his negator power. And those tragic backstories of Undead Unluck there, right? But as we see, there's a lot of notices of everything just going, like, people talking about, like, we see that Nico's like, oh, hey, you're coming this time, Bao, and Bao's like, yeah, all of the others kicked up fuss about me going. They said we'll never get a chance to surpass you if you stick around. And we see that old Shin has a granddaughter now, and he's like, oh, man, I wish I would have time to see Haru could grow up, right? And as everybody's going on, we eventually figure out what's happening as Ichika's like, hey, it's time to warp again, and pretty much Gina and also, the girl, Yasai, yeah, it's Yasai, or not girl, is it girl? I forget, the both are like, hey, we're gonna be able to do this again. So pretty much we understand that, yes, they're going to do the whole loop thing where they stand in the time skip or time warp, whatever you want to call it, by skipping a lot of quests in Apocalypse's book. And as that happens, we just see that they skipped 16 whole years, as we even see the Apocalypse is like, hey guys, stop using the quest like a time machine. Like, it's just so stupid. And we see that it is May 1st of 2015, as we see that Apocalypse is like, hey, but wasn't it a waste to do that? There might have been negators that you missed by warping forward so far in time. But Fuku's is like, hey, don't worry, there aren't, I guarantee that, right? Nico makes a little bit of note of, like, how can you be so certain about that? This loop already doesn't line up with all the other ones, so how can you know that for sure? But Fuku's just like, hey, I do know, because I asked. And he's just like, asked who? Like, who'd you ask, Fuko? And Fuko just says, like, it involves a field you're not partial to, so I won't say. Nico's just like, oh, is it the occult? And of course, she doesn't answer. So Nico's just like, oh, it really is the occult. But Nico's just like, hey, I'm going to leave. She ends up borrowing Shin's Kento Un cloud and heads out somewhere. As we now see that it is May 2nd of 2015 in Paris, France. We see that, what's her name, Fuko, is sitting at a cafe, and just like over 200 years on this planet, and I still suck out in places like this like a sore thumb. So, but she's eventually sitting there, and she comes up like, if she doesn't show up in the next 10 minutes, I guess I'll give up. She says, if she can't guess that I'm here right now, then she probably won't be chosen as a negator in the first place. But as she's sitting there, she just thinks about that 4.6 billion old promise that I made to the both of you. As we see somebody come up and just say, I swear, you said we'd reunite in 16 years, but you never said a specified date. As we see who this finally is, and it is Latla. Of course, this makes perfect sense with the whole occult thing. Who else would it be but Latla and her good old fortune-telling ability, right? So they both of them sit down, and Fuku's like, oh man, I never doubted you, Miss Latla. But she's just like, hey, just how much do you trust in my fortune-telling, right? So the two of them sit down, and she's like, oh, you look exactly like how you did back then. I mean, it's been 16 years now. I'm now 21. And Fuku's like, oh, hey, I did skip a lot of time. And they're pretty much just talking a little bunch. And Lala eventually brings up, like, so did it work out? My fortune telling from 16 years ago, that thing that you made me do back then when I was still a youngster, February 2nd of 1999, a day I will never forget. The first day we met, and the day my little sister's incurable illness was discovered. As we pretty much see that, yeah, back then, Fuko went and met a little Latla, and or Layla. Yeah, no, this is Latla, who of course was crying, and she just says, like, hey, I'm here to make good on a promise. And pretty much the two of them talk, and Fuko pretty much says, like, hey, let's meet again in 16 years, keep honing your fortune-telling skills, and that's what I'll tell you who I am and what awaits the three of you. Of course, being Latla, Layla, and of course, Rip. So the two of them sort of just talk, and the whole deal of this whole conversation is all pretty much about Rip and just pretty much explaining the whole negator sort of deal, right? So we pretty much see that Fuko explains this, and Latla is just like, alright, I see. So Rip and I caused Layla's death with our negation abilities, and we both fought against you. You guys were trying to save the world, where our only goal is to save my little sister. And she's just like, oh man, does that mean you can't trust me after all? But Layla's just like, no, that's not it. I'm just thinking about how good he is a man after all. That jerk Rip, that is. As the two of them talk, and Fuko's eventually like, hey, it's all good because you're so kind, Miss Latla. And eventually, Latla just asks, like, hey, what should I do in this loop? Tell me. How can I save my little sister? And Fuko says, just like, hey, I'll bring a change this time for sure. And she says, a tragedy involves your two abilities. As Fuko just thinks, like, Mr. Rip and Mrs. Latla, are you guys trying to save yourselves to sacrifice another? So I'm going to repair the scattered fate that you three bear. As they pretty much talk, and Fuko eventually says, like, hey, the best option is to make you two into negators. You already meet the conditions, Mr. Latla, but Rip on the other hand. But Latla's just like, hey, it'll be fine. I know you're concerned about whether or not he's skilled enough to become the vessel for Underpair, right? He cleared that bar a long time ago. He's already made a name for himself in the field of cardiology, but he's been globe-trotting, taking in new knowledge left and right. I don't have to look at my crystal ball to tell you that I'm 100% certain that he'll become the unrepaired negator. I'm positive that jerk stands as he is, even more amazing than his past self. As we see the final panel where we see Rip, of course, in the whole doctor's garb, walking somewhere with his suitcase in one hand and a medical name tag that says Rip Tristan on it. This is a great chapter, just pretty much showing us, yeah, the next arc is going to be the Rip-based arc. So, Unrepair, of course, is a very important power that we know in the series, and this is just a great chapter, sort of just setting everything straight of like, all right, the time skip to, of course, who gave that information, and it really clears up a whole lot of ideas of this is how Fuko knew that they weren't messing anything at all. So, great chapter all in all, and on to the next one, being the Ichinose Family Deadly Sins, chapter number 39, called Sota's Recollections. Last time I did one of these reviews, I could not remember Sota's name for the life of me, but now I do. It's Sota. We're good now, right? We open up this chapter with a little bit of a introspection on whenever Sota's camera got broken, and his whole family was just like, hey, we'll get you a new one. We didn't mean to break it. It was time you grew out of photography anyway. And it's like, oh, hey, we're family. And just a whole bunch of stuff as Rip not Rip, I don't know why I said Rip. Sota leaves crying, and we see that this is 6 whole years ago. He just goes around living his life. He gets a job. He ignores phone calls from his mom. And eventually it's 2023, and he's just living with a bunch of people, and he just goes through life. He eventually meets Kinta, and he eventually meets the other girl, whatever her name was, and they start to live as their pseudo family. And then we get to the whole stuff that happened last chapter about how Kinta isn't really a very good boy, and yeah, it's just a lot of stuff. Like I said, this series is done in the current time of Shonen Jump, and I just don't really have a whole lot to say on it, as the whole final part of the chapter is just like, the one girl who is also living there with him, like the mom in this situation, is just like, hey, you have a real family, and pretty much Kinta's like, hey, you're all liars and idiots, and they go back to the thing of, hey, we wanted to be a family. And at this point, the whole family just breaks down as Sota looks at these are two people in his family just crying on the ground, and Tsubasa standing behind him. And yeah, it's just sad tragedy that's going on. And yeah, this isn't the ideal family situation that they all wanted and Sota wanted after seeing what his family did to him. So yeah, it's a chapter. I mean, just looking for my rankings, this chapter definitely ranked very low. So I do feel like Ichinose Family Deadly Sins does get a little better towards the end of it, but at this point in time, it's just not great whatsoever. Next up is Marshal Master Sumi, chapter number 11. This chapter is titled The Underground, as we get a color page at the beginning of this chapter, which pretty much just has Kazuro standing there and then a Nito in his school garb just like running past him. So it is a very cool idea. Last chapter we got the whole idea of, hey, next chapter is all going to be about finishing moves. So we start off this chapter with Nito thinking of like, oh, a finisher, I wonder what that could be about. And as he's just thinking about all of this, he's just going through everything that happened. This is a very wordy chapter. Like, this has a lot of information. Like, if you think I spent a long time on the Undead Unluck chapter, which I think I did, which I don't really know how much I did, but I feel like I spent a good amount of time on this, to fully go through this chapter and break everything down, it would probably take a lot longer than even that one, because there is so much density in this chapter. Eventually, as everything is going on, Nito's just thinking about his finishing move. Eventually, Nito and his friend Yuya are walking out of school, and as they're leaving, they're just talking about all the MMA stuff. And as they're walking out, there's a whole bunch of commotion at front of the school, and everybody's just like, oh, hey, what's with that guy? He's got to be some kind of bad news. Maybe we should call a teacher over. And as Nito walks out, he sees somebody standing there, and it is none other than Hiroki, who is the one guy that we had, like, chapter 4, 5, or 6, one of those, pretty much all just focused on, and he is Tokichi's wrecking ball, and Nito's just like, oh, hey, what are you doing here? And of course, Hiroki just notices Nito and is like, Nito, sir, good work at school today. I'm just like, it's Hiroki. Don't you remember me? And Nito's like, hey, could you stop this? Like, what's all this about? And he's just like, yes, sir. I was told to get you. And he says, Mr. Kozlo's waiting for you in that car. He wishes to speak with you. And Nito's just like, oh, if Kozlo's here, why does Koz want to speak to me? What's going on now? And he pretty much shoos off Yuya and says like, hey, go to the gym and start training. Fine. I'll manage all this on my own. He's like, I'm not looking forward to this though. He eventually goes in, sits in the car, and of course Kazuro's there. And two of them have a little talk, with Kazuro just pretty much going like, hey, how's the MMA? And he was like, hey, I'm going to the gym thanks to all of the funds you gave me and everything. And Kazuro's just like, hey, isn't that just so wild? He's like, I also need 3 autographs. And there's just a bunch of joke stuff going on here. And eventually Kazuro just asks like, hey, how's the old man doing? And Nito just comes with the response of, oh, I don't know, hey, why don't you go check on him yourself, right? And Kazuro is just like, oh, are you still sore about your little buddy Yuya and all of that? But he pretty much does the 3 signatures that he asked about a second ago. But as all of this pretty much goes on, Nito's just like, hey, if I beat you in MMA, you'll grant a request of mine, right? When I win, you're coming to visit Grandpa. Of course, since that's one of his big motivations here in this series, so that's just really cool. And as everything just goes on, Kazuro just makes a note like, hey, that's fine, but just know that the old man that I knew and loved is long gone. It'll only lead to pain. And pretty much he was just like, hey, I know you say that, but do you really want to avoid him till he's dead? You need to see him while he's still got memories left, or you'll regret it, right? And as you're talking, he's just like, haha, sounds like you better hustle then, right? Speaking of, did you work a way out to get pro yet so you can fight me? And Nito's like, no, about that, I haven't done anything about that yet. And he's like, that's because you're asking me to become a pro fighter strictly to settle a score. And Kazuro's like, hey, you're taking the concept of pro too seriously. I never said you had to make it your whole career, right? Only a handful of pros make livings from competitions. Most of us have day jobs or work part-time on the side. And as you're just talking about this, pretty much who's his face? Nito just says, like, hey, so go ahead. No, Kazuro says, just go ahead and pursue whatever you want to do. If that's the nursing school, then go for it. If the MMA stuff is equivalent of getting your driver's license, right? So it's not a great requirement. And we see the driver of the car makes a little bit of a note of this. Like, is that really the best way to describe that? Which I think that's a pretty funny joke. But Nito's just like, hey, I think there's an amateur tournament going on next year, so I'm thinking of entering it, right? And Nito's just like, oh, look at that, they're a good promotion, but next year, that's not soon enough. Of course, I don't think we know when the series takes place in, so we don't know how long that would actually be. And Kazuro's just like, or not, Kazuro? Yeah, whatever you want to call him. He's pretty much like, oh, I'm going to need you to hustle faster, get you in by a year's end at least. So he talks to the driver and he says like, hey, change of plans. The driver gets a little pissed, like, oh, hey, you keep changing them. But pretty much we get the idea that there's something that he wants you to see, right? And it's going to take a long time, so he's going to be out very late. So as they're going, we see that Hiroki goes with them and pretty much acts like a bodyguard for Nito whenever they're going. And they go into this place that is pretty much called The Dropout. And it is a underground fighting and entertainment promotion, right? And pretty much Nito's like, the underground, should I mean, that sounds really bad, right? Should I be worried? But Hiroki's like, no, I know it sounds bad, but it's really just an amateur fighting tournament, right? Those guys up there, they're all amateurs fighting. And we pretty much just see that there is the dropout ringleader, a former professional wrestler, Dreamer Yumeki, with just a wrestler design if I've ever seen one myself, as he's just like on the loud screen like, hey, get out of my ring, you dumb brats. If you think I'm going to let you wreck the place, we're here to protect our home, you got that? As Nito makes a look of like, hey, that rep there is the scariest of them all. But pretty much as we go on, pretty much Hiroki leaves Nito there, pretty much saying like, hey, the crowd's looking to get into a brawl over there, let's go check it out. But Nito pretty much just stays, and he's just like, I can't get caught in my school uniform here. I'm a walking target, right? I need to find a corner to shrivel up in because, of course, if his school gets noticed that he's here, yeah, that's not good whatsoever. But all of a sudden, he just hears somebody over to the side who's just like, yeah, hey you, what the hell did you just say to me? Yeah, you, I'm talking to you. And there's this guy who's just standing here who's getting yelled at by one of these people. And Nito's like, oh, what's going on here? And he sees this other guy and he notices that he's also a student, just thinking like, oh, I'm not the only student here. The guy who's yelling, his friend comes over like, hey, what's the issue, bro? And pretty much this guy's like, this punk called us to pits, right? After all the work you make, you put him to finally give us allies where our place belong. And there's pretty much just something going on here. And eventually, Nito just butts into this guy's conversation, and he's like, man, it sure is the pits when you get separated from your friend. That's what he meant. He's like, glad we found each other. Dropout's the best, right? As he's just like, oh, well, look, I think you're about to go in. And the two guys just sort of look over, and Nito uses this distraction to get out of the way and also push this other guy out of the way. And the two of them start talking. Nito's just like, alright, I think we'll be safe here. That was really scary. I was shaking so bad I spilled my drink. That was so uncool of me, right? But this guy looks over and he's just like, why? And Nito's like, oh, is he asking why I stepped in? And Nito's like, oh, well, if you're a fellow student, then I got separated from an acquaintance, so I feel kind of lonely, so I did something to do about it. But the guy's just like, no. And Nito just sort of thinks about it as like, no, as like he's not with a group or like shouldn't have. Like, he's just like, well, what am I doing here? And he just like, eventually like, I'll just do this. And he points over like, hey, they're fighting over there right now. Do you want to watch them? And the guy just says nothing. And he's just like, well, I guess I'll wander off on his own if his answer is no. So they pretty much watch these two probably mid-30s guys fighting up top. And this other guy eventually just says, those two, at least they have the moves down. And Nito's just like, yeah. But he's looking at them, and he's just thinking, they're low level, the worst. Or no, this is what the other guy says. He says, they're low level, the worst, but I'll use whatever I can. As eventually Hiroki comes back over, finds Nito, and they walk over. And he's just like, hey, sorry, I have to go. And he thinks like, oh, will this guy be all right alone? And our guys are like, hey, I live in the area, I'll be okay, this is my second time here, and thanks, you know? As everything's going on, Nito's like, hey, I know, and same. So pretty much they just sort of walk away, and as they're walking away, Nito's going over to Hiroki and just like, what's going on? And Hiroki's like, hey, Kozlo's talking to you. And Nito's like, oh, hey, what's going on here? As he talks to Kozlo, and pretty much the whole part of it is, like, Kozlo says, like, hey, I owe a lot to drop out from the old days. Do you know that the promotion I'm in, FXC, will let you enter the ring as a pro if only 3 amateur wins, right? So I pulled a few strings for you, and when next month's dropout tourney rolls around, you'll be fighting in it. Good luck. And we get a whole end of the chapter deal of Nito just saying, take back what I said. I truly do hate my brother. This is a crazy good chapter, just setting up the whole next arc of this manga, which is the Dropout arc, which by the time I'm reviewing this series, this arc has already been done, and it was pure joy to read, and having this be the start of it, yeah, this is just a really fun arc and a great way for it to get started. And look at that, I pretty much talked about the entire chapter like I said I wasn't going to. And because of that, we're going to make this next section really, really short by saying the next chapter is Tenmaku Cinema, chapter number 20. It is titled The Night Before the Submission. I have an entire YouTube video, about 20 minutes long, up on this chapter, giving all of my thoughts on it, on the channel. You can go find it on the channel, Tenmaku Cinema, chapter number 20 review. I don't even know what I titled it, but it's on the channel, so go check that out. But to sum it up really quickly, pretty much, Himeki and Hajime go to Director Yukio's office to show them the shore. They watch it, and there's a whole bunch of thing of like, Director Yukio saying like, oh, hey, Hajime, are you sure you don't want to make movies? You want to end up going pro and all of this? And you know the chapter is Hajime and the rest of the movie making club going to the, whatever the Apricon student film competition to pretty much show the shore to the main screen. That is the movie, or that is the chapter. That's really it. Sadly, it's ending next week, but it is what it is. I mean, this was an alright chapter at most. Then next up is Kill Blue, chapter number 19. This chapter is titled Secrets Out. We get an interesting intro page, pretty much going like, Juzo Otagami, before he abruptly disappeared, he was the greatest hitman in the biz. His mission success rate was 100%, but he never accepted jobs where the target was a woman, child, or regular civilian. He mastered the assassin suit of combat skills, including marksmanship, hand-to-hand combat, and knife fighting. Fully ambidextrous, he's accurate with his rifle, he's accurate as a rifle if a handgun is in his left hand. Some say he possesses the devil's own left hand. And that whole explanation was pretty much to get to the point that, yes, Otagami is shooting his gun at the younger brother, Kazuro, and this Kazuro guy is like, man, he's good. In a straight-up shootout, I'm at the disadvantage. As we get a shot of course, a bunch of people walking below this stadium, and all of a sudden there's gunfire and smoke coming out of the top of it, and everybody looks up as, yeah, this is a terrorist attack in Japan. Like this is a really big deal, all things considered. As Otagami's just like, all right, after I got this gun from my Nekoda, the contact guy's like, I was able to pick up a few spare clips, but yeah, you're really saving my butt today, Nekoda. And eventually, a security guard comes over and he's just like, oh, hey, what are you doing there? And he's like, have you heard all the strange explosions going off? Like, I don't know if this is terrorist or what, but you need to get out of here. And Otagami's just like, oh, man, are you kidding me? As he's just, like, holding his gun and all the clips behind his back, right? But eventually, Kazuma comes out of the wall, and he just says, like, comes out and, like, starts shooting around, and Otagami's like, hey, stop, idiot, we can't drag civilians into all of this. And he's just like, hey, it's your policy, not mine. I could care less. But Otagami comes out and just gets into another fist fight, or not, a gunfight with Kazuma. They keep going back and forth. Eventually, after this sort of last gunfight, where pretty much Otagami shoots all of the bullets out of the air, Kazuma's like, he shot down my bullets, that's impossible. I've never heard about anybody who could do that besides a man with the devil's left hand, Juzo Otagami. As he just thinks like, oh, okay, now I get it. Nora Mitsuoka, Farmix, whatever. Pretty much he just says like, hey, it is not a coincidence at all. You're a legendary hitman, but since you're so much younger, I thought you had to be different people. It's still really hard to believe, but it's not coincidence at all. You're Juzo Otagami in the flesh, right? And both of them are just like, oh crap, he is figured it out. This is so bad. And Nekoda makes a note of like, hey, this is why I asked you if you were sure you wanted to enroll in school with your name like that, right? And Otagami's like, hey, I never thought anything like this would happen. But pretty much Otagami just starts bawling out, and he just says, like, that's not true. I mean, yes, there's a connection, but we're not the same person. I'm not the legendary hitman Juzo Otagami. I'm Juzo Otagami's love child. Pretty much just, like, making up a whole ad-lib. And pretty much just making up a big lie, right? So eventually Cosmo's like, okay, I see. And he's like, I guess you've been to a lot through, as he just makes a joke of, like, he's crying a little bit. But all in all, we pretty much just say that we sort of get an intro into what Cosmo's all about, right? As he's just like, my brother and I have had a rough time too. My little brother, Inji, never used to be as quiet as he is now. And of course, right now he's like a zombie-looking dude who swings golf balls and golf clubs. But pretty much we just see that Cosmo just says, like, hey, before we got dragged into this, I was a kid who just loved magic tricks. My brother was really into sports. We were two normal kids back then. But he's like, oh, never mind. Swapping origin stories isn't going to change anything. He's like, I'll just say that Inji means more to me than anyone else in this world. Maybe there's a chance that Mitsuoka's secret can really return my brother to how he used to be. And he says, hey, I know you have your reasons too. This is a battle neither of us can afford to lose. As he takes the lighter out of his pocket, flicks it open, and he says, hey, my specialty is hypnotism, and this right here is my weapon of choice. As we see that he has a lighter, and on the lighters they just designed of a 2 of hearts on it, of a playing cards. And as this happens, we see that the security guard gets a good look at it, and he pretty much hypnotizes the security guard to attack Otagami. So that's sort of a big deal. And Otagami's like, hey, I admit you got me, I did not see that coming, but if one security guard's all you've got, then you've got really nothing. And Cosmos is like, oh, hey, you think that's just it? Well, you should see your mistake, right? Bert says that you thought I only started hypnotizing people after our battle began. Nope, the moment you started chasing us, just as we predicted, our preparations were already complete. Long since complete. As he does the phone call, and he seems like do a voice memo, and he snaps back his lighter into it, and I guess that's a sound that triggers all of these people to attack Otagami in the streets down below, right? So Otagami then pulls out his phone, and he gives good old Tenma a call, which is really funny. I do really find it extremely funny that we can tell by the UI of Otagami's phone here that he's definitely using a Apple phone, because it's got the same sort of OS phone call system on it that most phones nowadays have, which pretty much is showing like, oh hey, there's the mute button, all of your other numbers, speakerphone, FaceTime, and all of that. So as the two of them are talking, pretty much Otagami just says like, hey Tenma, I'm really sorry, but I way miscalculated. You gotta run for it now. And he's just like, and if you see a bunch of normal looking people coming your way, run away, they're all hypnotized and they'll attack you, right? And pretty much Tenma's just like, oh, okay, yeah, I got it. And everyone's like, wait, you already get what's going on here? And Tenma's like, oh yeah, I get it. From the exploding golf balls, I knew that we were dealing with everyday street tugs, right? And I knew there was a chance we'd die. But I ain't going to run. Don't underestimate the all-star athlete. As he just continues saying that athletes may not lay their lives on the line on the field, but the best ones, whatever their sport, play as if they do. And if I'm aiming to be a top athlete in baseball, basketball, and soccer, I gotta learn how to stare deaf down and win. Why I'm saying that is leave this guy to me, as he ends the phone call, as we see that he pretty much takes a soccer ball and kicks it over into Eiji's face, and he's just like, hey there, Stitches, let's play a game. And that's where you end off the chapter showing that, yeah, right, Tenma's an awesome character, and he's going to be going up against Eiji. That's just really awesome. The whole thing about the love child Otagami is just like, oh, okay, sure. And I really do like what we started to get with Cosmo, a backstory with him, and sort of just his whole idea of like, hey, I'm going to be an antagonist, but I've got a reason to do this, because I want to return my brother to normal, and maybe Mitsuoka will be able to do that for me. But the highlight of this chapter is definitely Tenma just being a badass, and Tenma's just awesome and great. I mean, that's all I really got to say. Next up is Nue's Exorcist chapter number 16. Of course, the whole thing going on in this chapter is a fight between Shiroha and Gakuro for who will win the battle between the two of them. And to pretty much just break it, Gakuro wins in the end. There's a few things of where Gakuro broke her protective barrier last time, and Kyokatsu, the other one, is like, hey, Nue, seems like your vessel's at its limit, but it's still commendable. He hasn't broken down yet. But Nue's like, no, this is where the battle truly begins, both for Gakuro and for Shiroha. So the two of them start to duke it out some more, and eventually Gakuro's just like, hey, I want to save you, Fujino, regardless of our current situations. And she's just like, how dare you? As all of a sudden, they just keep attacking, and Shiroha's like, what the hell do you mean by I can't beat you in any one thing? You have everything, you have fun every day. I thought you were like me, but I was completely wrong. I get irritated by just looking at you. You have the same power and no parents just like me, yet you have friends and you have freedom and you have a mentor who will guide you step by step. You have the audacity to offer over your hand to me even though that you have no real power. You're blessed by those around you and live a good life. It is unforgivable. And she just continues saying, like, if you can have all of that, then give me Nue. Give me at least one precious thing in your life. And she's like, hey, Gakuro, Yajima. And Gakuro just looks as we see that she is using her trump card, as Kyokatsu calls it. And pretty much as all of this happens, Nue is like, hey, oh, you seem very happy to say that. And he's just like, yeah, I do. And he's like, this is my first time seeing her like this, and I am enjoying it. So the two of them are attacking, and Shiroha is like, hey, you fight by absorbing shadows, so I'll send you to a place with no shadows, as they send him up into the moonlit sky. And Shiroha's just like, hey, I will never accept you. We can't really do this. And all of a sudden, Gakuro just comes around like, Fujino, if you claim there are things you lack in life, then let's find them together. All of them. As she's caught up in this. As, of course, what happens next is Gakuro gets over Nue in the sky, leaving Gakuro's shadow to be cast on Shiroha there, and she makes note of, oh no, Yajima's shadow's on me. And Gakuro says, in exchange, I'll claim your mission, Fujino, as he takes her hollow weapon and splits it in half. As Fujino is just like, oh, did I lose with this? It's all over. But as she's falling down from the sky, Gakuro grabs her, and she just says, like, I was envious. I was very envious of you. As Gakuro looks down at her, as Nue just says, this match's winner is Gakuro. All in all, no matter what shit you give Nue's Exorcist, which there's a lot of shit to give it, this is a amazing chapter, just showing the two sides of battle with the whole Fujino, I want to save you, and eventually Gakuro doing it. He proves everything he's saying by, like, Fujino, let's find everything that you lack and everything that you want together. We can do it if we work as a team. As he sort of just grabs her down, and yeah, Gakuro won. Very awesome chapter, but sadly, there's not a whole lot else I want to say about it. Next up is the final chapter of Fabricant number 100. This chapter is titled Fulfilled Agreement. This chapter is pretty much a big of a mess as we get more of Fabricant number 99, or not 99, Fabricant number 100, pretty much talking about the whole Doctor's motivation. Like, the Doctor's goal is to bring back the Islanders and give them the bodies that were impervious to war. That is why he gave us the ability to fight. And Fabricant number 100 is just like, so then he already made the ideal human at that point. And number 100 says, at first I thought that too, but I was wondering what we were lacking, and what you said to me made me certain of it. A creator can't make something that isn't already within themselves. The Doctor never had a heart like the Islanders in his notes. What we lacked was the ability for others to wish others happiness, even if it meant we had to sacrifice ourselves. That meant every person we killed, the further out of reach our dream became. And of course, this number 1 is just freaking out like, oh hey, you can't be serious. And it pretty much all ends up with Fabricant number 100 grabbing number 1 and setting her body ablaze and burning the two of them together, right? And she eventually says, like, I always wondered why Ashumi's blood drew us to him so intensively. he never wanted anyone to feel the same way he did. He wanted to eradicate us Fabricants, even though if that meant him sacrificing himself. And that's what the Doctor was after all along, the heart of an ideal human. As she pretty much just says, in other words, that's all it takes. If I stop you from slaughtering all those people, that'll make me the ideal human. Pretty much showing that no matter how she is, and even if she has motivation, she's still a Fabricant and a monster at the end of the day. So as this is happening, we see the flaming body of both Fabricant 1 and 100 sort of tangled together, falling down to the staircase, as we see Ashibi walking up the staircase to him, and number 100 just looks at him and says, like, we've been through so much together, but even after you were hurt so badly, I felt nothing. As she pretty much just thinks, like, hey, please don't blame me, I wish I had a heart that could have felt something too. I've sacrificed so many lives, and both Fabricant and human, all just so I could have your body, but that such thing is not mine to have. That's why I'm not doing this for you or anyone else. I'm going to eliminate my own kind using this body of mine, and I'm going to do it all for myself, as we get a double page spread here on pages number 10, 11 of her falling down all the way to the ground, pretty much taking out Fabricant number 1. And the big thing we see here is that she is diving down towards the ground. She sees a light, and at the bottom of this sort of light she sees, there's another person there who she connects arms with, and that's really all it is. And she just thinks that, oh, I fulfilled my end of the agreement, Ashibi. And at this point, we cut to the whole end of chapter stuff of Fabricant number 100. We see that it is pretty much a birthday party for Ashibi, being that he is now turned 18 years old. And we pretty much see all of the important characters in the series. We see Luca, who was the person who's introduced in chapter number 2. We see Hugo, the one important dude there. We see whatever the brother of Ayako, I think her name was. Was it Kushi? I think it may have been Kushi. And then the Chinese dress girl. I don't remember most of these characters' names, but pretty much Ashibi's just like, alright, come in everybody. And pretty much his narration just goes like, it's been little over 3 years since then. The Fabricants that attacked Mortsafe were defeated by the 5-star combatants, and over the next 2 years we were able to defeat the last remaining few. No one will ever be hurt by Fabricants again. I've healed since that day, but we lost Miss Ayako, and also, at the time, I couldn't also help but feel a little bit sad, as he thinks about Fabricant number 100. He just says that, I was told I shouldn't feel sorry for a Fabricant, that I finally gotten revenge for my family. But maybe it was because we had been through so much together. I made a decision long ago that I would do all I could to make sure no one else suffered the same pain I had, and that's why I would go on to heal my own pain. For that reason, I don't want anyone to feel the pain that my death might bring them. So now, I'll do all I can to live and be kind to my own body. As pretty much we see it, Luca and all of these other people here is like Ashibi, bring him out of his thoughts. It was like, hey, congratulations on turning 18. As Ashibi's final thoughts are just, and I hope at some point, someday, this pain will heal. This is a very nice point to leave the series off of, because of course whenever Ashibi turned 18 years old, that is when Fabricant number 100 was going to steal his body and flesh to make herself the perfect human. This is a nice final chapter, pretty much showing that, okay, Fabricants are all dead now, and Ashibi will live a happy life, even though if he needs to take time to repair all of the scars that happened within him. It's just a very nice sentiment to see at the very end of the series, and yeah. Fabricant number 100, you may have not been the best series also, but you definitely had a lot of good things about you, so I'm very glad I was able to read you, I guess I should say. And with that, next chapter we're going up to is Akane-banashi, chapter number 76. This chapter is titled Shikasai Festival Part 2, with a color page showing Akane and all of her other Ani-sans, or Ani-sans, whatever you want to call them, and Shiguma, all of the kids at the Shiguma school pretty much, just walking around and doing their thing in the Shikasai Festival. It's really nice to see. We start off the chapter with a bit of a flashback, as we see this flashbacks from Giriko's perspective, as Giriko pretty much thinks like he was over a dozen years older, but despite that, he spoke to me like a normal person and was always looking out for me and trying to help. But in September of that same year, Ani-san was expelled from the school. As we see that he's thinking about Shinta, who of course is Akane's dad, And we see that 5 months later, the following February, from April to February, there was just a 10-month gap between when I and Akane started. So pretty much we eventually see that Giriko and Akane's Yakisoba stand won the competition for the Anisan's festival things or whatever, pretty much just showing that they really won it all together. The final results, of course, Giriko and Akane won. Koguma did a very good runner-up position. He's like, hey, if I wouldn't have fled stand in the first half and not been all my Rakugo prepped, I wouldn't have been able to do it. And Makeru pretty much had a 0% fund rate. And we pretty much see why this is that Makeru just says, like, well, all my sales are very good, but I used all the money trading the ladies, so it doesn't really count. So, of course, Makeru's whatever, right? Koguma's also just done after all of that, being that he was in performance mode for way too long, as he calls it. So that's a pretty funny thing here. And we see one of the other guys, the guy who was with Koguma earlier, is just like, hey, Akane's really getting into the swings of everything here. And everybody else is like, hey, almost too much, right? But as it pretty much goes on, he's just like, man, she's still very impressive. For better or worse, she's always been at the center of attention since last summer, right? Among our fellow Rakugoku who saw our recent selection crowd, the majority's ranked Akane's skill higher than the girl who actually won, who of course was Hikaru. No, was it Hikaru? Maybe. We'll see. I may forget that name. Pretty much just saying, like, it reminds me of what I thought about Rokuro, of course, and Rokuro is a very important character in the series. It's one of those other Rakugoka who Akane's going to have to deal with at some point. We pretty much see that Akane does the whole Rakugo competition, and Giriko just thinks, like, man, I know better than anyone just how much she's grown. As Akane gets done her first performance, walks out to back the stage and is like, alright Giriko, go on, I've got y'all warmed up. As Giriko goes on, and he draws the whole thing of the Y on his fingers, or the kanji for happiness or whatever, and it's the whole thing of, like, just eating the crowd so you have a personality go up on stage, and he does that. He does a story called The Carelessless Nail, pretty much just going like a man, a married man and his wife move into a new home, and pretty much the wives are like, the whole crux story is like, the wife's like, hey, can you put a nail here so I can go hang the broom on it? And pretty much the whole deal of the story is the hijinks begin when the careless husband hammers in a single nail in this humorous Koke-banshi, right? So pretty much we just see Giriko's story, which is fine, but pretty much the whole crux of it is that he hits his hand, right? So it's pretty funny, and it's a lot more of a longer story at that point. We eventually see the lady from the Rakugo Cafe come out to greet Akane, and she's like, hey, I'm from Rakugo Cafe, do you remember me? Akane's like, oh yeah, you're Miss Yoshino, and he's like, oh wow, you came to watch me, and the two of them just talk like, I certainly did, your Rakugo's gotten even better, I hardly recognize you. And eventually Miss Yoshino here comes over to Gakuro, to Giriko, and just says like, hey, and you too, Guri-chan, your yakisoba was simply delicious. And Giriko listens to this, and he just thinks like, I guess I made it a bit too delicious, as we pretty much see what he just thinks about is his whole idea of, she didn't even mention my Rakugo, and it's just a deal of like, wow, I just guess I miss it too delicious. As at this point we cut over to Makeru sitting up and looking at the stars, and we see that Giriko comes over to sit with him, right? And as the two of them are sitting together, Makeru just says like, oh, how'd you know to find me here? This is the best spot for fireworks, so watch them with me. And he's just like, yeah, I will. As the two of them meet, Giriko eventually says like, hey, I finally understand what you meant when you told me to watch Akane's performance. As he thinks back to that whole idea of, I know better than anyone just how much she has grown. As we pretty much get a whole idea of these kids playing a game, and pretty much what it is, we get a translation note just saying that like they are playing a step climbing game version of Jock and Rock, paper, scissors, with Rock, which is Gu in Japanese, lets you take 3 steps up. Giruko is a winning with scissors, Choku, pretty much lets you take steps. So they pretty much play rock, paper, scissors and advance steps up from there. And pretty much the whole point is that there's a girl and a boy playing here, And as they're playing, Yuriko just thinks that April and February, just a 10-month gap between me and Akane starting up lessons. But now, as these two are playing, and we see that the girl has surpassed the winning move that the younger boy played. As Yuriko just finally comes out and just says, "Hey, Ani-san, I'm not as good as Akane." And as Yuriko says this, we end off the chapter as fireworks go off in the background, and boy, does this chapter just hit you in the feels. It's really just all about Yuriko just showing up with his whole idea of, Akane surpassed me. And I know this, and it's just a really sad thing to see with Yuriko having to come to terms with this Rakugo Cafe lady, not even complimenting Yuriko on his Rakugo, but simply just on his yakisoba, which is a little messed up, but I get the point that, of course, the author of this, what is it, Takasa Moe? Story by, Yuki Suenaga. Takamasa Moe is the author of the series. This is a just great chapter, and man, it really puts you in the feels for Yuriko, man. Next up is Blue Box, chapter number 115. This chapter is titled Lucky. There's a nice card page with Chinatsu on it. That's pretty cool. So pretty much what we start off with is Taiki is going to a competition, I think. He's going somewhere. I guess like a training thing or... Oh, I see what it is. It is a tournament for first years. This is the whole thing that we've been building up to. We see as the whole badminton team's walking in, we see that Sajikawa is also there, which is the school. If I'm not mistaken, Yusa is with them, and they make the whole note that they don't see Yusa with them. And one of the badminton kids goes over, grabs a pamphlet, and says that, Yusa pulled out of the tournament. And Taiki's like, Yusa did what? What's going on here? Isn't it Sajikawa's top player? But pretty much it says that Sajikawa's top players went on a trip to play abroad, and Yusa got selected from the first years. And Taiki just thinks man, that's such a big deal. And Taiki was just thinking man, I was so excited that maybe he remembered my name. And he's like, but I was the only one who was pumped at all to take him on during this tournament. And he's just like, but he didn't see me as competition at all. So as we do all of that, we cut back over to the school where Haru and all of the second years are. And they're just talking, and they're like, so Yusa's not actually playing. And you're like, man, that's awfully cheeky of him. And pretty much Haru's whole point here is so Taiki has basically zero excuse to do anything but win. And as they're talking, who's his face? Haru pretty much just says that the hare hopped on a plant and hightailed it, so we're wondering what the Taurus will do. And he says what Taiki needs is the confidence that I'll make his competition shrivel up, right? He's just not just a desire to win, but by refusing to lose and having the ability to back up that confidence, loading himself up with that pressure going forward will make him leagues stronger after all, right? As Haru just thinks hey, you've beaten Yusa once, so don't be a challenger forever, Taiki. And eventually we see that a bunch of people are just talking at the tournament itself as we cut back there. And everybody's like, man, and I thought Yusa would win the tournament here. It's is there even another favorite left? As they're how about that guy from Sajikawa? And pretty much we just see that this is Mochizuki. I don't know if we've focused on this dude before, but we sure do focus on him now. As some Sajikawa guys are just saying oh, hey, Mochizuki, people are saying that you'll be the one to win this tournament. And Mochizuki's just oh, really? I'm very happy to hear that. He's I'll have to work hard so nobody says that Sajikawa is screwed without Yusa. So as they're all walking around, we eventually see that Kyo is around, and he says Ayami, who's here, of course, is the team's manager. And, of course, Yusa isn't there, so she's unable to see Yusa. So Kyo just sits down and talks with her, and, as they're talking, a bunch of these kids are oh man, I guess Mochizuki will really snag the win, right? And Ayami's eventually hey, everybody's guessing who won the tournament, right? And eventually Kyo's is it goes to show how everyone thinks that Yusa is the strongest out of all of the first years. And Ayami is just Kyo, who do you think will win? And he's just you're gonna ask me? Don't forget, I'm participating too after all. As she sort of just looks up then, she just thinks oh, well, I didn't, and she sort of realized that, yeah, she was a little bit of a dick there, so, is what it is. And we see that some people are like, oh man, she's getting worse, and she just like, oh man, I didn't mean it for it to come off like that, and gets into more of a pouting fit. We see that Taiki's starting to play some badminton games. He gets through game 1, game 2, and a bunch of our games, and eventually shakes hands with the loser or winner, I think whoever it is. And Taiki eventually is like, man, that match had a lot of unnecessary rallies. I need to focus more on making straight shots next time. He's like, if I want to take on Yusa eventually, I have to be more. As eventually one of the other first years that come up, we haven't seen his character in a while, but he was the one kid who wanted Chinatsu's number, right? And it is Kishi, right? I really don't remember too much of this kid besides that he's an art badminton player, and he's pretty much like, oh, so it's really you, Taiki. And pretty much Kishi makes a note of, man, Taiki, your aura has really changed since last time. He's like, hey, I just watched your match. To be honest, you've gotten pretty strong, so I'm kind of nervous, right? He's like, I'll be getting even stronger because of that. And the two of them sort of talk, and Taiki's like, hey, Haru-senpai's always wallowing me, but I've got to get better because after all, I am going to nationals. And at this time, while Taiki and Kishi are talking, there's somebody who just laughs in the background, and this is none other than, what was his name? I already forgot. Mochizuki, who just makes a little bit of a laugh here, and he's just like, oops, I'm sorry, pardon me, but it's so rare in this day and age to hear somebody talking so openly about their goals. As, who's his face? Taiki looks over, and he's like, oh. And as Mochizuki finally realizes, he looks over at Taiki, he's like, oh, you're that guy who beat Yusa in the practice match. Granted, Yusa had been playing back-to-back matches for a while by then, and Taiki just looks at him and just looks at Mochizuki really inquisitively, as he just says, don't you not have a plan to go to nationals? And Mochizuki's like, oh, no, I only play badminton because I like it. I don't have such lofty ambitions. And without Yusa at this tournament, I'm actually lucky, because if he were here, I wouldn't have any chance at winning. As Taiki just looks at this guy as he starts to walk up and walk away, and he just thinks, lucky? What good is it to have that kind of luck? Pretty much saying that, yeah, if his only luck is to win this tournament, if Yusa isn't here, he's got no motivation himself. And that's where we end off with Box. A really interesting note, and yeah, Mochizuki, he's an asshole. Plain and simple. Next up is the Elusive Samurai, chapter number 124. This chapter is titled Brute Force 1337. Pretty much we see that Akie, Zeref, Tokuyuki, pretty much a lot of the army is entirely dead. And we see this is all because of, what's it called? Sulfur gas and stuff. So pretty much a bunch of people died, and we see that Gimba's here, and he's like, oh, hey, come up here, Kia, I smell sulfur. It's a toxic volcanic emission, and he pretty much just explains how he learned that. And yeah, it pulls up in the bottom, and it kills things, right? But Tokyo makes the observation, like, hey, Kamakura doesn't have any volcanoes. But Gimba says, we do know a man of science, one who might have transported sulfur here. As we're like, oh yeah, it's Usagi, right? Is Usugi, that's his name. It's him. He's bad. So pretty much Kie is just like, oh man, that's what it is he's just like, oh, there's a letter in one of these guys' mouths, and he pulls out the letter, and it's from Shiba to Kie, pretty much saying like, hey, I took all the water I needed. I warn you against seizing the riverbanks, for we can kill anyone there. As Kie's like, oh man, he expected us to attack your water supply, pretty much showing that, oh man, he outsmarted the two. We see some more fighting stuff, and eventually we see that Shiba's up top somewhere, along with Usugi. So Tokuyuki and Akie and everybody goes to fight them. They're running up a mountain or some staircases, and some people fight, and Shiba makes the observation of, oh, Kie sent Tokuyuki to fight up the stairs, right? But oh no, as Tokuyuki and all of his retainers are running up, oh no, a rock is rolling down. It's a falling boulder, right? And oh my gosh, Ayako shoves Tokuyuki out of the way, so as Tokuyuki falls, Ayako starts to fall down and is stuck there on this mountain cliff, and Tokuyuki reaches out his hand to pick up Ayako, and Ayako blushes because, oh man, she loves Tokuyuki. And it's this whole thing to where Tokuyuki pulls her up, but she's got to pull up her own weight. oh, ha ha ha, isn't that so funny? But oh my gosh, as this happens, some dude comes, oh no, his name is Momono Tadasune. He comes down and he says, oh man, be my bride, Ayako. And it's just like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? And Tokyuki's just like, no, she's one of my retainers, she's so valuable. And this guy's just like, oh man, then I win her in battle, count on it. And the end of the chapter, oh look at that, Uesugi is preparing Nagao, his armed weapon fighter guy. And he's like, oh man, it's time to finish this. And oh no, Shiba's there, and he has a secret anti-Hojo weapon in a box, which is human-sized. What could it be? This chapter sucked. It's just Akie is so bad for the Elusive Samurai. I just can't get that over enough. It's just bad. The whole Monomono guy who's like, be my bride, Ayako. It's just bad. It's just bad. I know where this arc is going, and it does get a little bit better here soon, but right now, yeah, it's not good at all. But to end off this episode of Shonen Jump reviews, we have Witch Watch chapter number 123. This chapter is titled The Day of the Disaster, Part 10. Of course, last chapter we had the massive reveal of Nimue being a hawk and coming to save the day, as we get this awesome cover page where Nimue is flying out of the sky and Keigo sees her and catches her in the air, and they both sort of give each other a little hug as they get down. But Keigo is eventually like, just, hey Nimue, like, what's going on? He's like, that hawk a second ago, is that you? And Nimue's is like, yes, I'm a shape-shifting witch, I can finally say it. But eventually, Keigo's like, a shapeshifter? What do you mean there? But Nimue's is like, oh, but Keigo, why haven't you turned into a wolf? Why is that? And he just says that my crescent was taken away. It was all part of the enemy's plan. And he's just like, Nico's fine. She's just trapped in that pit over there. And Nimue looks and she's just like, you fought this whole time just as yourself and you've been injured that badly? And she looks over and is like, wait, are you in love with Nico too? And Keigo's like, alright, why are you bringing that up, right? And he's like, oh wait, I'm so not crushing on Nico. I just owe her a lot, and you know that, right? But Nimue's just like, that's true, I'm sorry. But Keigo's like, hey, thank you for rescuing me. I thought I was a goner. As all of a sudden, Keigo moves in, grabs Nimue. Nimue does her whole making up a poem sort of thing called Sun Embrace, as of course that's what Keigo does. But Keigo, of course, did this because the big stone golem or earth golem came down and did a punch where they were both just standing. Kumagi makes the note of like, oh, Nimue meow, you're as pretty as the rumors say, and whenever I look at you, it makes me realize how badly this world needs to be upturned, right? We see that Nimue looks at Kumi, he's like, oh man, I guess she was hiding the fact that she's a warlock, and like, oh yeah, she's an herb shaper witch. But Keigo's like, we've got this now, if we work together, we can beat her for sure. But Nimue's just like, wait, how are we going to beat her? And Keigo's just like, huh? I mean, what do you mean? You can shapeshift, right? I mean, so turn to a bear, or a grill, or a T-Rex or something, right? To go off on a tangent, this reminds me of D&D so much, right? Like, being a druid with wild shape, you're like, alright, I can turn into all of these great creatures, but you're really limited at most by, like, challenge rating 2 if you're, like, a moon druid or something, and by challenge rating 1 if you're just, like, a regular druid. So you've got to use, like, polymorph to get all of the really good creatures. And recently in a D&D campaign I'm in, we were at a certain point where we had just unlocked or gotten to 8th level, and I had the spell Polymorph on me, right? So during a battle, I threatened, like, oh, I'm going to turn into a T-Rex, and everybody's like, oh, no, you can't do that. So eventually I actually turned into a T-Rex, and it was a really funny moment where, like, oh, yeah, because I can do that, right? But it sort of seems like that's how the shape-shifting witch thing here is going, right? But Nimue says that I can only turn into a few things right now. It's like cat, mouse, and a hawk, and that's about it. And Keigo's just like, oh man, well that's super uninspiring. And he's like, okay then, you brought a crescent for me, right? And Nimue's like, no, I didn't. I didn't bring anything at all. So as the two of them talk, Komigi's is like, man, it's good. It looks like they didn't bring any presents, but I can't have her turning into a bird and flying to get one. So she's like, all right, I'll finish this now. And she's like, I'll bury you both alive, right? And Keigo's like, damn it, if only I had a crescent. As Nimue thinks, and she's like, thinks about the pond-shaped island lake, and she's like, hey, Keigo, up. use float to float up into the sky. And Keigo's like, huh? What are you talking about? As Nimue transforms into a hawk, and she flies up, and Keigo's like, what the heck, what's up here? And he's like, the higher I go float, the harder it is to control. And he's up really high, and he's like, don't panic, stay calm, I can do this. As he looks around very high up in the sky, and he looks over to where a hawk is turning around, and there in the distance, in the landscape, there is a crescent-shaped lake. Keigo sees it, and he thinks from before, because before, of course, him and Kumigi were thinking like, oh man, they say there's a lake hidden behind the trees on this side, right? But they say you can't see it from over here, right? And Kumigi made a whole note of, couldn't we see it if we flew over there? But of course, seeing the crescent, Wolf appears. And as Wolf comes down, there's this really awesome panel as he just appears on the ground. And Kumigi's just like, the werewolf? As Wolf is just like, oh man, that hurt all over. I'm shocked he held out for that long. But yo, it looks like I owe you some favors, Keigo. As Kumiki's just like, oh man, this is so bad. As we see that Wolf comes over and just takes off the leg of the golem, right? And he's just like, it may be big, but this thing is just some big pile of mud. As Kumi's like, as long as there's earth nearby, I can repair it. But Keigo just goes through, or Wolf, I should say, just goes through and completely destroys the golem. And all of Kumigi's repairs just don't do anything until eventually she nearly passes out, or she does pass out from everything going on. As Wolf just says, you may have practically infinite dirt out here, but your magic sure isn't infinite. As Nimue looks over and she's like, oh my god, Wolf is strong as can be. As Keigo walks over and is like, well, I guess I better dig up Nico then. As we see that Kumigi's like, the crescent, where was it, right? And Wolf says, someplace people flopped on the ground slinging mud we'll never find. As we sort of just see that he thinks, he's just like, beat the hound back, but still never giving up. As we get this awesome image of Keigo soaring up into the sky, following the hawk, as Wolf just continues saying that only someone brave enough to spread their wings could reach it. As Nimue hears this word, and as we end off the chapter, we see that the werewolf versus the Earthshaper Witch is done. This was a brilliant chapter. Keigo and Nimue are my two favorite characters in the series, and the whole moment of Keigo seeing the crescent up in the sky and then flying down and becoming Wolf. Oh my gosh, it is such a great chapter and such a great moment, and I just don't have anything else I can say because I'm just going to be repeating myself on how good of a chapter this was. But with that is all 13 series that I read in Shonen Jump this week, and to wrap this episode up, we're going to go through for what was my favorite series and what was my least favorite series this week. Of course, if you couldn't tell from the way I talked about it, Witch Watch was just practically amazing this week, just seeing Keigo and Nimue doing everything, and of course I actually read the Shonen Jump series in this order, so going through there was a little bit of like a lull in the middle where it's just like, alright, we've got Nue's Exorcist, followed up by like a Fabricant number 100 and all of that stuff, and eventually ending up with just this brilliant Witch Watch chapter. It's just great, and Kento Shinohara, this chapter is just amazing, right? Next up is My Hero Academia. It was just another great chapter filled with all the All Might that we all know and love. Undead Unluck was next, just another great chapter. Tenmaku Cinema, I put after that. I definitely feel like at the time, this Tenmaku Cinema hit me a lot differently in the moment, because I'm just like, I really liked that series at the time, but here a few months later, I definitely think that I would change up these rankings a little bit, but at this point, it's not for me to do that now, right? Next up was Kill Baloof, another fascinating chapter. Akane-banashi with the whole idea of, oh man, Gearko, that really sucks. Then I put Nue's Exorcist next because just the whole Gakuro and Chiroha moment was great. Followed up by Blue Box, One Piece, Marshal Master Subi, Fabricant number 100, Ichinose Family, Deadly Sins, and the Elusive Samurai. Definitely those bottom three deserve where they would go. The Elusive Samurai wasn't good. Ichinose's Family, Deadly Sins wasn't amazing. And Fabricant number 100, it was a chapter. It really was. Knowing where Marshal Master Asumi goes in the future, I would probably rank it a bit higher at this point, but it was still just another great chapter. So to run that down one more time was Witch Watch, My Hero Academia, Undead Unluck, Tenmaku Cinema, Kill Blue, Akane-banashi, New Age Exorcist, Blue Box, One Piece, Marshal Master Asumi, Fabricant number 100, Ichinose Family Deadly Sins, and the Elusive Samurai. And my character of the week, I feel like there were a lot of really good characters. I mean, Aoyama shown in My Hero Academia. Nobody really shown in One Piece to me. Undead Unluck didn't really have anybody. I really did like Nito in Marshal Master Asumi. Of course, Tenma had an amazing badass moment at the end of the chapter. New Age Exorcist, I really feel like Gakuro and Shiroha did really show a lot of good potential for their characters. Akane-banashi Giriko was just a masterpiece. Of course, I'd be regress not to mention Mochizuki in Blue Box. It's just that antagonist. But of course, I had to give it to Nimue because Nimue had such a great moment this week, just showing Keigo the way and how just she affected Keigo. It was such a great moment. But definitely, I'd say a runner-up. I'm not going to do an honorable mention this week, but Giriko had a fascinating chapter as well. But I definitely do feel like Nimue does deserve it. And with that, that is going to be this video. My voice is very, very tired, and I talked about all the Shonen Jump stuff, so that's pretty cool. So, like I said, I've got plenty of other Shonen Jump videos on the channel, so if you like this one enough and you're like, oh man, I really like that, well, hopefully you would want to go check out one of those other videos. But if you want to do that, maybe you'll at least consider leaving a like on the video, commenting down below, and maybe just subscribing to the channel. It all really helps me out a whole lot. And also, linked in the description down below, I have a Discord and Twitter linked also. Come join those communities, and you can pretty much talk to everybody about, like, oh, the Shonen Jump chapters is to come out. By everybody, I mean, like, me. But I always like to talk about people Shonen Jump, so that's all of it for the plugs and promotion and stuff. But yeah, with that, I really don't have too much else to say. This was Weekly Shonen Jump, issue number 40 of 2023. Great issue, probably all in all, really. 3 chapters that weren't amazing, but the rest were pretty darn good. And yeah, I'll be back next time with issue number 41 of 2023. So yeah, so issue number 40, yeah, this will be Glowplasma231, signing out.